were you on January 7th, 2025? Well, if you live in the Pacific Palisades area of Los Angeles, it'll be a day you'll never forget. There was a small wildfire that broke out, and it led to one of the most destructive wildfires ever in the history of the United States. The conditions were perfect. Low humidity, drought, dry vegetation, and then there were the Santa Ana winds, a phenomenon that happens near the Pacific Ocean where the fires resulted in winds that were hurricane force. The destruction was catastrophic. Those wildfires killed 30 people. More than 200,000 were displaced from their homes. 18,000 homes were destroyed and 57,000 acres were burned. Now, to fight wildfires, there's a process called a prescribed burn or a controlled burn. Basically, what happens is fire officials start small fires, controlled fires, to kill all of the dry vegetation so that larger wildfires won't start. Well, today we're going to see a story in Daniel chapter 3 that is a controlled burn, a prescribed burn, a story about a fire that is there to teach us a lesson. We're going to see how God uses a fire and three leaders, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to teach us about faithfulness. And if we look at this story of this fire, we might just learn something that we can use in our own lives and leadership. Let's look at Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. One day, King Nebuchadnezzar ordered his craftsmen to make a statue plated with gold that was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. When finished, it was set on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon was using this statue to demonstrate his power and authority and dominion over the people of Judah. This statue was 9 stories high. It was on a big plain so everyone could see it. Really, this giant idol was meant to intimidate and cause the people to submit. Do you have something that's intimidating you right now in your life or leadership or a relationship? Something that you're having to contend with and you don't exactly know how to respond? Well, in this case, the king ordered everyone to bow down to this statue. Let's look at verse 4. People of all nations and languages, by order of the king, you're commanded to bow down and worship the golden statue. Then skip to verse 6. Anyone who does not obey the king's command and refuses to bow and worship will be taken immediately and thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. So the stage is set. Comply or die. But not everyone was going to bow down to the king's statue. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, along with their friend Daniel, were all part of King Nebuchadnezzar's court. They'd been given positions of influence, and now they literally faced a fire, a test. How were they going to respond? How did they respond? And honestly, how can we respond when we face fires in our own lives? Well, first thing is this. They didn't compromise where God was concerned. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down to this statue. Time and again, we're going to see in the book of Daniel that Daniel and his friends are tested. They're going to face fires, and they're going to have to either be faithful to God or turn and run. In Daniel 1, it was a test of food. Eat the king's food or be faithful and eat the food that God had prescribed. In Daniel 2, it was the king's dream. Interpret it or die. In Daniel 3, here we have the statue. Bow down or be thrown into the fire. And we need to see that each time Daniel and his friends refused to compromise where God was concerned. Well, King Nebuchadnezzar didn't throw them in the fire immediately. Remember, these guys were in his court. He knew them, and he wanted to give them every last opportunity to compromise. Nebuchadnezzar wanted them to obey so he wouldn't have to kill them. Look at verse 15. Nebuchadnezzar says, "But if you refuse to worship, you'll be taken immediately and thrown in a furnace of blazing fire. What God could possibly rescue you from my hands then?" When you were a little kid, did you ever hear the story of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and the fiery furnace? Probably even heard a little Bible story rhyme to it. You know, the reality of this story is it's a test of faithfulness. It has a deeper meaning. Were these men going to stay faithful to God when faced with the fire? Nebuchadnezzar here is calling into question God's power and authority. Are you going to bow down to me, or are you going to trust your own God? I just love how these men answered Nebuchadnezzar in verse 16. Take a look. Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to defend our action in this matter. We are ready for the test. They would not compromise where God was concerned. Number 2, put your trust in God alone. Put your trust in God alone. Notice these guys didn't say, hey, Nebuchadnezzar, we're ready to die. They knew that what was happening here was a test. When faced with the most powerful man in the world at that time, King Nebuchadnezzar, they said, we're going to trust God over you. They absolutely refused to bow down to anyone or anything other than the God of heaven and earth. The men continue. If you throw us into the blazing furnace, then the God we serve is able to rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire and release us from your power, your majesty. But even if he does not, O king, you can be sure that we will still not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue you erected. I love that sentence. But even if he does not. Let me say it another way. Their trust was in God and not the outcome. These were men of conviction. You know, do we have the guts when we're praying to God or asking God about something to say, God, even if this does not work the way I want it to, I still trust in you. I am trusting you and believing in you, even if you do not. Are we willing to lose it all for the sake of trusting in our God? That's a tough, tough prayer to pray in the midst of a fire. The third thing we learn here is that no matter what fire we're facing, we're never alone. We are never alone. Interestingly here, God did not immediately save Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In fact, they were led to the fire, they were bound up, and they were thrown in. The fire was many times hotter than normal. In fact, it was so hot that the guards who threw them in were all burned alive, throwing them into the fire. Now let's read what happens in verse 24. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste and spoke and said unto his counselors, Did we not cast these 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. You know what this verse is telling us? It's saying God was literally with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in that furnace. In the midst of the fire, God was there. But you know what? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego probably knew this was going to be the case because they knew the words of the prophet Isaiah, who wrote this about 500 years earlier. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they will not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you will not be scorched, nor will the flame burn you, because you are precious in my sight. You are honored, and I love you. Do not fear, for I am with you. You know what? In Daniel 3, this wasn't a wildfire. This was a controlled, prescribed burn. It's there for a reason. It's there to teach us a lesson in faithfulness. No matter what fire you're facing in life or leadership, don't compromise where God is concerned. And put your trust in God alone. And third, remember, God is always with you. He'll never leave you or forsake you. As with so many things in life, God did not spare the fire from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Instead, He led them through it, and they came out stronger and more faithful on the other side. Are we able to face fires in our own lives and leadership, and like these men say to those around us, I'm ready for that test?